Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Wandering Road Podcast. I'm your host, Chris, and today I'm joined by a co-host, my friend Dean again. And today we're going to be talking about aliens, history, and mythos. We're going to be continuing this conversation that we started from last time, man. How are you doing today, buddy?
Pretty good, man. How about you?
Not too bad. I got a nice cold beer open. What are you drinking?
I got myself a Mai Tai.
At what time is it over there? 9:30 in the morning? 10 in the morning?
No comment. No comment. And this is the only time that I can do this and you could do this. So yeah, it ended up being it's 10:30 a.m. over here in Hawaii.
Hey, like they say, it's 5 o'clock somewhere.
It's almost lunchtime. It's almost lunchtime.
Fair enough.
Anyway.
So aliens and history and aliens and mythology. What do you got for me today, man?
So I've been thinking about the direction that we can go with this conversation. What I would really like to start with is some technical and scientific perspectives, just to kind of like lay a groundwork for the direction of the more interesting stuff. And I'm sure a lot of people who are interested in aliens have probably heard about these theories and paradoxes and whatnot before. But the one that comes to mind that I find one of the most interesting is called the Fermi paradox. Are you familiar with the Fermi paradox, Chris?
Very loosely. You want to go ahead and define that for us?
So yeah, essentially the Fermi paradox is a mathematical discrepancy between the lack of conclusive evidence, like basically any evidence that's out there that we might have for extraterrestrial life is lacking. So we have alien sightings and we have bits and pieces from our history that might allude to the fact that we've been visited or are being visited. However, there is an open lack of conclusive evidence. So in science, at least. However, the other side to that paradox is if we exist in the universe that's so old, like 14.5 billion years old, we're here right now as human beings. We're conscious, we're aware, we have intelligence. If the universe is that big and that old, then it seems extremely, extremely improbable that we would be the only ones, a blip on a blip, to have intelligent life or intelligent awareness on this planet. So one of the reasons why scientists float this idea that the Fermi paradox can exist, where we have a universe that's full of intelligent life, but also at the same time a lack of evidence, is because the universe is so big and so old. So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. Like, yeah, there's so much room and there's so much time for life, other places to evolve intelligence, but we just don't have the technology or the ability to reach back or forward in time to see or to locate these intelligent sources. So the best thing we have here is on the planet Earth and all of the things that we're going to talk about. So based off of that baseline understanding about what we see and what we don't see and what the mathematical probabilities of the universe are, what are your thoughts on that, Chris? Like, what do you think about probability? And are we too old in the universe to have experienced any life? Are we on the tail end of the universe in terms of conscious life? Did we miss the band? Did we miss the big, intergalactic confederation date, 5 billion years ago or something like that? Or is more life still ahead of us and are they still around?
I'm hoping we didn't miss out on the Galactic Federation. That would be nice to be a part of, unless
Right.
it turns into the Empire,
God.
for you Star Wars fans that are familiar with that. See, that's a difficult one for me because I want to say that it's not too late. There's still more time and there's intelligent life out there, and civilizations out there that we haven't contacted yet because we don't have the means to actually contact them, right?
Sure.
Like, what's the best that we could do? We could send out these satellites, we could send out these radio signals, but they're all subject to the speed that they're programmed to move at, like the speed that a radio wave moves at. It's not like we could program a radio wave to move at like warp 10 to Alpha Centauri and hopefully on one of their planets there's some advanced life there. Thinking back to the concept of maybe we just missed the train, it's because our limitations in technology.
Mm-hmm.
I think for a universe so vast and so old, other galaxies have had advanced civilizations, and even our galaxy have had advanced civilizations. Over time, those civilizations rise and collapse.
Yes.
One day we might run into the equivalent of the space Roman Empire by finding their ruins or something like that on these different planets. That's within the realm of possibility. Unless they wholesale wiped each other out over some sort of conflict or something like that, one would think there are still remnants out there. If the concept that these civilizations have died out or are in a very weakened state. But I would like to think that there are civilizations like ours that are still up and coming.
Right. Absolutely. And to go back to your point about what it would look like to find a civilization. See, that's what fascinates me is basically if we had any inclination whatsoever, any proof on this planet or another that conscious life evolved somewhere else separately from humans. And even if they're gone, even the civilization is gone, like like let's say we find some paintings on Mars or something and some DNA or something associated or statues or whatever that show different creatures that don't look like humans, then we can probably assume once we find that the entire universe is either currently or once was or will be filled with conscious life, even if we can't get in touch with them. But I guess we're not really here to talk about that in terms of like theory and just regular conscious life in the universe. What we want to talk about is the visitations that we've had historically as human beings and what that could mean in the equation that we're talking about in terms of the Fermi paradox and likelihood of intelligent beings in the universe. So if we have so many sightings, to me, that in itself is kind of a proof that there must be something more than what we're seeing. So if you can imagine, like 300 or 400 years ago, somebody was standing in the field tilling something and they saw a flying object in the sky, no way to possibly use anything around their experience with the world, their actual world around them to explain that. So we probably missed out on very many different types of people claiming to see or explaining the scenarios or situations they were in where they saw a possible UFO. But today is different, right? Today we actually have recordings, we have audio capture, video capture, and all sorts of things. So I think the increase of us capturing such things is increasing, and that might be the reason why we're seeing more reports of UFOs that are around the planet. So the next thing that I jump to in my mind is, well, what's the difference between aliens who visited human beings like 1,000 years ago versus UFOs that are visiting us today as more modern, more intelligent, just basically more open and connected human beings? So I don't know. Do you think that there's like any type of differentiation between what UFOs might have experienced back then versus now, and what their motivation might be to keep visiting us?
I've thought about that before. So if you look at history and you look at the claims of aliens coming down and interacting with human beings in the past, what's the one constant during that time? Humans were primitive, at least to them, like really primitive, like feral to a point, one can argue. Right. And when you get into that situation, they're easier. This is going to sound bad, but they're easier to control and easier to manipulate. Mm-hmm. So if an alien comes down to, let's say the aliens come down to the ancient Egyptians, right? And they start interacting with them. They're not going to view them as extraterrestrial beings, right? They're going to view them as something higher than their mortal existence, because they have these technologies that they don't know, like they're magic to them, right? So that's, to me, that's why, that would be the only reason why I think like aliens would more than likely interact with ancient humans and primitive humans as opposed to modern humans. Because with modern humans, Whenever they see a UFO or a frickin' weather balloon, what's the first thing we do? We scramble the jets. We're ready to fight.
Hmm.
And I think to save themselves a headache or any type of conflict, they'd rather not interact with us, if that makes sense.
That does. That's actually, I really like that insight. I think that's a brilliant observation, because you can talk about the primitive perspective and the modern perspective, and it's night and day in terms of what humans brought to the table back then versus what we bring to the table now. But the only tack on to that I would bring to the conversation is, if aliens it's kind of clear to me that aliens probably didn't understand humans if they interacted with us directly. So some of the ancient stories, like for instance the Anunnaki, I believe there were a lot of examples of the so-called Anunnaki gods directly working with or contacting the upper echelons of those ancient societies. So person to person, or person to alien rather, or person to God from their perspective. So if these aliens showed their true form, which it doesn't seem like they did, because the drawings and whatnot don't capture what we see aliens to be today, then that to me shows a deeper understanding of humanity and what we would believe at that time. Because imagine if we descended on an ant colony. I mean, I've seen, this is probably not a good example because ants aren't conscious. But ants, I think there was a video or a photo, I don't know if it was Photoshop, but like ants, like basically sitting in a circle around like two other ants or something. Or we see this with crows, for example. Maybe that's a better example, where crows will mourn their dead. So crows, if they have someone from their flock who ends up dead on the street or something, for some reason, crows feel compelled to hang out near the dead body. And some scientists argue that it's kind of to pay reverence, right? So to have that understanding that human beings can project onto crows and kind of get a sense of how they act as a social body, and what they think and how they perceive the universe with their mourning, their what, it's inherently different from other creatures. It's a little bit more intelligent, right? But we still can't communicate with crows like crows can communicate with crows. So like if we had a technology where we'd want to communicate with them, what would we do? The best way to communicate with them would probably be to create some kind of robotic device or some kind of vessel that made us look like a crow, act like a crow, maybe even speak crow if that was such a thing. So that, in my mind, you're absolutely right, where it would be much easier for an alien race to kind of fabricate a way to talk to a more primitive race of people than it would be to do today, because today we actually understand more deeply what it could mean to be an alien, what the implications of aliens are, such as the Fermi paradox perspective. So, I mean, the only thing I can hope for in the future, if aliens truly are, omniscient, or not omniscient, but benevolent, and they don't want to hurt us in any way, the hope is that we become increasingly more intelligent to where we can earn that spot in some sort of like galactic federation, or, brought to the table to have kind of more of a greater role in the universe, or at least our galaxy. Because that would be awesome, man. That'd be like, to be alive for such a thing would be incredible.
Yeah, I completely agree. And I like your crow example too. And to continue with aliens contacting humans in antiquity as opposed to now, like, let's say hypothetically next year, right? Like a giant ship decloaks and lands on, I don't know, the lawn of the White House. And these beings come down and they're showing off all this technology and we're looking at it. People back then would be like, oh my goodness, what is this? Us right now would be like, oh wow, how did you do that? We're close to doing that. How did you do that? What's the missing piece? Yes. So it would be from the perspective of how can we use this information to better ourselves, as opposed to, we don't give a shit that you have advanced technology. Are you going to help us advance the technology? If not, you can get the hell out of here. That's how I view it from the modern perspective.
I absolutely love that you brought that up, because that is, you hit on something that I've been thinking about for years now, in terms of like technology and what that means to us in terms of understanding and stuff like that, where we're at in this modern world. So the first thing that jumped in my mind was the quote, that one of my favorite quotes. It's from Arthur Clarke. And it basically says any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Now, if you apply that to aliens and ancient civilizations, absolutely makes sense, right? Because they had no basis for understanding of even what electricity was, to our knowledge. So maybe they did. Maybe they had some kind of cool technology. Like I know there's a lot of argument nowadays that maybe they had some kind of like what do you call it? Like vibration technology. They could lift heavy stones or whatever. That'd be cool and all, but it's not truly technology in the perspective that we think about it today with transistors and electricity and electronics and whatnot. But what a night and day stark difference between then and now in terms of what aliens can bring to us. Because like you said, we understand what technology is. We understand that there are components to the universe that can be harnessed and kind of like driven down a path to help us, you know, to do something in our lives, like as a tool or whatever. So that wasn't inherently understood by a lot of people back then. So if aliens came down today with the same technology and they tried to show it to us, we would have much more of a basis. Even if we didn't even understand how it worked, we would understand that it's not something that is metaphysical, that something comes from like the gods. It's something that they figured out how to do within the constraints of the universe or the space-time continuum or multiverse or whatever, wherever they pulled their energy and technology from. There is a way to do it, and we can actually have a chance of learning how to do it. Whereas people back then in like the, 1,000 years ago or more, like they had no basis for it whatsoever. So that's why I think it's more and more interesting for our race to think about what it would be like to, and we should plan for it. We should absolutely plan for meeting extraterrestrials who might want to integrate us more into their universal component of whatever federation they might be a part of, or even if it's just themselves, however they govern. Yeah, I love you brought that up, man. That's great.
Yeah, and before I loop everything back together to the Anunnaki, there's another point I wanted to bring up. Like how you said that we should prepare ourselves for this. We should always prepare ourselves. I agree with that. And we should always be prepared for the possibility that they're not going to be nice.
Yes.
Because if we look at, this is just using our planet as the example. What did Homo sapiens do to all of the other hominids throughout the planet? What did we do to them? We bred them out of existence, or we wholesale massacred them.
Yeah.
What did the explorers do when they came to the Americas? What did they do to that primitive civilization? I don't. Okay.
No. Yeah.
Let me correct myself. They're not primitive. They were limited with their resources.
Yeah, no, I understand what you're saying. It's not derogatory. It's just you're just talking about from a basis of us compared to us now.
Right, with regards to their military technology. That vast difference, that air of superiority.
Yeah.
Like, I think it's a natural thing within all animals, like all creatures. Because if you look at the food chain, like lions, they act a certain way. Like there's always a predator, there's always a prey. And who's to say that in the eyes of a potential extraterrestrial that we're not the prey?
Yeah.
Like, I mean that has to be taken into consideration. Not like we could defeat an extraterrestrial force. The only thing that could probably beat them is our biology and the biology of the planet with the bacteria.
Right.
Kind of like the War of the Worlds example. But to get back to the Anunnaki, according to the ancient Sumerian texts, the Anunnaki were responsible for having a direct hand in helping them with fertility, helping them with agriculture, helping them set up their cities, and setting up their hierarchical structure. According to their myth, the Anunnaki held the highest seats of power, but human beings mimic that. If you believe what the Sumerians believed. So back to the whole technology thing, they came down because they had something to offer, and they knew that if they provided this, we would get something out of it. And if you continue with the Anunnaki, which I would like for us to do, they used human beings to mine gold.
See, that to me, it's like, that just screams the concept of taking advantage of another race by lifting them up so they could be stronger to fulfill your will. And that's going back to your original point about what are the motivations behind aliens? Are they benevolent? I don't know, man. I'm not so sure, because now I'm not saying just because they're not benevolent doesn't mean that they're out to destroy us. I think that if they wanted to wipe us out, they really could. Because think about it from, like, I don't know, from a human perspective, when we have an infestation with bugs or something, do you tear apart your house to, like, go look for the nest and smush them with your finger one by one, or just completely obliterate their entire surroundings? No, because you're not going to get all of them. You're going to end up destroying way more of your resources or whatever you need around your house before you actually get close to killing all of them. So what do? You introduce a little bit of poison. Slowly over time it spreads, and then, it gets spread to their young, and then eventually everything, they kind of just all die out at once, and then you've obliterated. However, not saying aliens are trying to do that. I'm just saying that I think, and then also, before I go on, one more perspective I almost forgot to bring up with that is, you're absolutely right. So there's two conflicting theories about aliens. So if you have an advanced alien civilization who is traveling the universe, they've clearly been around for way more than we have. So there's a scientific argument between, does intelligence inherently grow to be more benevolent as it is around for longer, as it evolves with new technology and advance? Do they reach a point beyond where they need to go to war or feel like they need to destroy or anything? Or, does it become their mission to grow and spread in the universe like life or whatever? However, if you take that same concept and you apply it to human beings, going back to your example of how, like, every time someone who has power, who has the capability to project power, comes into a place, they end up, like, screwing over the native population or harming them or even obliterating them. So if that is part of our evolution as humans, going all the way back to, human beings and Neanderthals or whatever, where modern human beings as we exist, fought and basically obliterated the more peaceful Neanderthals. Can we expect the same thing from a more advanced alien race? So going back to the Anunnaki example, I completely agree where, at first it's likely that they at least wanted to act benevolent, even if they weren't completely peaceful and wanting to help us. I think that there was always an ulterior motive, because I think any advanced race that achieves that level knows that you got to play the game to continue your existence in your race. So part of playing that game might have been mining for gold or having other beings mine for gold for you, which, as we know, gold is one of the most conductive elements in the universe that we know of, and it would be perfect for some sort of advanced technology, intergalactic technology perhaps. So absolutely, I think that if the Anunnaki did visit human beings, and they did have an ulterior motive to get something for themselves. So what do you think that says about the future of alien engagement? Do you think you would you, Chris, trust them if they came down inherently, or would you always be a little bit skeptical no matter what they say?
I'll speak as a historian first. I would be highly skeptical. I would be alert and be on guard. That's because of, like, my background and my studying of history and how different civilizations of people interacted with each other. For example, like with Julius Caesar and the Gallic Wars, Caesar wholesale obliterated them in the name of bringing civilization to them, to Romanize them, if that makes any sense. So I would be very skeptical of them. And if they come down and say, like, hey, we want to give you all this technology, yada, 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 my first inclination would be like, okay, what's the catch? What do you want from us? That would always be in the back of my mind.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. I think that here's the thing that I inherently think of. If you have an alien race that can traverse the open universe, or at least, the galactic part of our universe, to where they can get around near instantaneously, they have some kind of technology to fold space-time and travel faster than the speed of light to get around to different planets or whatever. If they have that technology, then that's the same as saying, I'm going to take this 45 caliber pistol and I'm going to shoot that cockroach on the ground. There's no comparison whatsoever. Like, the cockroach might be able to bite you. That bite is going to heal in like an hour, and you're still going to be able to obliterate it with whatever piece of human technology you have. So that's why I always think that I'm kind of in the camp to think that just like the alien, like the movies that we created as human beings, like aliens come down, like Mars Attacks, like the aliens played along, and they got us like to feel like we were comfortable, and we always gave them a chance, and then they ended up obliterating us because that was their plan all along. But I don't think that's the case, because if they wanted to do that, they should have been able to do that by now, even like 1,000 years ago. They could have even hurled a meteor at our planet, just like that, what happened with the dinosaurs, and obliterate all life, or almost all life on the planet, if they wanted to start from scratch. So they wouldn't even have to come down and shoot with like laser beams at us, or and introduce some kind of like infectious disease or something. So I think that if they do have a motive, it's not to destroy us. It's to either advance us to a point where they can use us to a degree that will benefit them, or in the best case scenario, maybe they really are benevolent. Maybe they really do believe that advancing the beings that are conscious to a point that is like them, or even further, is the best thing for the universe, because that's the purpose of the universe. And that really, think about that perspective. If you're an alien race that's 1 million years old, you have probably figured out every aspect and purpose of why the universe is, what brought it about, what happens after, what happened before. You would probably know almost all of that information, something that we don't know. So we still have religion. We still have this idea that once we're gone, there's something after, some people believe, and some people believe you're just done. It's just over. However, an alien race that's 1 million years old probably has a better understanding of that. They have no gods. They have no religion. But that doesn't inherently make them heathens or whatever you want to, like, doesn't make them like bad or wanting to harm other people. Maybe they have elevated to a degree where their goal is to achieve singularity with the universe, or whoever knows, but they must have some motivation with interacting with. That's the baseline concept that we could always talk about, which is aliens must, if they're interacting with us, there must be a motivation. So that's what it is inherently fascinating to me, is not the human perspective and the history behind what we see for UFO, like in terms of UFOs and aliens, but what is the alien perspective? What is their purpose? What do they want to achieve? And why are they still here for thousands of years? Why are they still showing up? Do they live here? Do they live in the moon? Is there a station? Can they travel long distances instantaneously to where they don't have to stay or hang around? Are we just some petri dish? There's so many questions to talk about and to go down. But if you want to, we can go down the creation portion, since this podcast episode is more about the historical aspect. What do you feel would be, do you think humans evolved completely on the planet by accident? Or do you think that there was some kind of alien influence in directing our, even just our DNA, if you want to argue the Anunnaki side, which is, they altered ape DNA or whatever, or whoever's DNA to grow into modern human beings to be able to be smart enough to mine their gold? Do you think that's more likely? Or do you think that we actually did evolve away from any type of conscious interaction or intelligent interaction, and then they came to us later?
So let's say this. My logical scientific side believes that we evolved on our own. We were able to achieve these architectural feats on our own. And unfortunately, the burning of the Library of Alexandria set us back, I think, at least 1,000 years, which still hurts my heart to today. I don't want to go off on a tangent, but apparently within the Library of Alexandria, there was a blueprint for, I don't know if this was the Temple of Zeus in Olympia, but apparently when you would go into the temple, they would open the door, there would be a floating chariot with Apollo floating in front of the statue of Zeus. So that's what I mean, where I think human beings, I don't think we give our ancient ancestors enough credit for the intelligence that they had and what they could do with their technology. But putting on my tinfoil hat and going down the route of the Anunnaki, because me personally, I love mythology, and the concept of the Anunnaki is one of my favorite. If you want to go down into it, the whole concept of the Anunnaki is, well, there's a couple of stories that go, right? they say that they took, I guess, the embryo or they like some sort of artificial insemination. So the Anunnaki, they artificially inseminated a Homo erectus female, which then gave rise to humans, modern humans as we have them today. And then the Anunnaki used those humans to mine for gold. And what's interesting is that, well, according to some theorists, ancient astronaut theorists, you know, these folks, the guy with the crazy hair on the History yeah, the guy with the crazy hair on the History Channel and Von Daniken and all these guys, they basically say that the Anunnaki then taught humans how to be like them. So we modeled all of our civilization based off of their teachings.
See that? So the thing that I think of immediately after hearing that is if they were the ones to teach us, you know, law and structure and agriculture and all those things that inherently led to the foundation of more modern civilization or whatever, instead of just being out in tribes or whatever. If that is truly modeling after them, that doesn't sound awfully advanced, does it? I mean, if an alien race has intergalactic technology and they've been around for way, way longer than us, then they probably don't even need agriculture. They probably don't need any type of checks and balances or governmental hierarchical structure. They probably have some elevated way of sharing information or thinking together to where it's kind of like a hive mind, possibly. So that's why I find it fascinating when we hear stories, like historic cases of how, you know, gods were interpreted to possibly, or aliens were possibly interpreted to be gods. And they basically told us, you know, this is how we live. This is how you should live. And that's not just the Sumerians or whatever. That is also more modern religion as well. Like, you know, what in Christianity, live. What's the quote? It's like cleanliness is close to godliness, or like live more like God or something like that, to where that's just a guideline, you know, like if there is a God doesn't need to do the things that human beings do because God is inherently elevated above humanity. So that's the way I see alien beings who are advanced. Like they are trying to teach us. But again, I always go back to that same point, and I'm sorry to kick a dead horse, but like basically just saying, you know, what is their purpose? What is their motivation to help us become more structured and to grow? Is it purely population increase, which makes me nervous, you know, because civilization inherently makes it easier for human beings to increase in population. So is that something that we should watch out for in the future? But then again, we're getting close to almost, I think China and India are about tied for the population right now. It's like 1.4 billion. And then the rest of the world is like an additional 5 or 6 billion or something. So we're getting up there in terms of population compared to where we were today. So I can't imagine, you know, let's hope to whatever force you want to hope to, that is not the sole purpose of humanity, to call, to basically pick us out as whatever alien force needs. But I like to think, you know, it's more benevolent than that. I kind of think that maybe they're trying to groom us for a brighter future and a bigger place in the universe.
To go back to the Anunnaki on that point of like why they did what they did, according to the creation myth, human beings were only created to essentially be a tool for them, some sort of workforce or slaves, if you want to put it that way, right? If you consider the Anunnaki, when they came down, like humans as we know them today weren't a thing, right? And they helped create us. And this is, I wanted to bring up this point as well, but the whole concept of our DNA, like it's like 99% similar to chimpanzees or something like that. And that 1% difference makes us what we are away from them.
Right.
So if you subscribe to the Anunnaki theory, they helped create us. And the purpose of that, according to the legends and stories, was to be subservient to them. And once they got what they needed, they kind of just left. Because if you look at, I don't mean to get modern and political with global conflicts or anything like that. For example, the Taliban, right? In the 80s, when the USSR invaded Afghanistan? Who helped supply them? Who helped train them?
Right.
And then we kind of left them to their own devices, right?
Yeah.
And then what happened?
They used our same weapons to fight us later.
Exactly. Look at it in that way. It's kind of the same thing. The Anunnaki, according to the Sumerian myths and the Anunnaki, like ancient astronaut theory, the Anunnaki came down. They created us for a purpose, which is the purpose of getting and extracting these resources for them. And once they got what they needed, they left us to our own devices. Well, once the U.S. got what they needed from the Taliban and the Mujahideen of crippling the USSR, they just left them to their own devices.
Sure. That's a good analogy. I think that is totally possible. The only thing, though, that pops into my mind with that is, so the Anunnaki who supposedly came down and retrofitted DNA to create modern humans for their own purposes and left, you also have to consider the fact that there are still to this day many sightings and many arguments that aliens or extraterrestrials rather are still visiting us. So does that inherently mean that, and I'm sorry, it's so stupid. I'm sorry, everyone. I keep saying the word inherently. I hear it over and over again. I'm trying to change that. But so does that mean that there are multiple races of aliens? It seems
I would say so.
You would say so. So if that's the case, then is there a hierarchical structure? So it's this, maybe going back to your analogy where like the Taliban, the Mujahideen or whatever, like they're still human beings. They're still capable of great levels of intelligence. However, because of the time period they were grown up in, brought up in, or the education they were exposed to, and the very constricting religious perspective they had, you can argue that they are not as open-minded and modern as people from another country that is like a democracy or something, right? So like, is it the same thing where like these alien races take a hierarchical structure where like, let's say the Greys are the penultimate, they are a million years old, they have the most technology, their pure motivation is scientific, and they're just trying to like gather information and take that. But then there's also like a lesser level, like the Anunnaki, who maybe for their own selfish reasons are trying to grow their capability as an advanced race in the universe. So therefore, they choose to advance humans to exploit them and then leave. However, once they leave, they don't really care about like the scientific aspect. They just want to advance themselves. So the Greys are still hanging around, and the Greys are still more technologically interested. Like they're more inclined to learning about us and watching us, and not necessarily interacting us like the Anunnaki. So that's the only environment in which I can imagine there being multiple alien races who are coexisting and like maybe not at war with each other. And also the last thing I want to bring up is, if that's the case, think about human beings. Like, it's so hard to keep a secret by yourself. It's even harder to keep a secret when you have multiple people who are keeping that secret. So why would an alien race not come down who's like maybe lesser than, say, the Greys, who might be more technologically advanced? Why would they not come down and try to introduce themselves? Are they being blocked by the more advanced alien races to doing such a thing because it would ruin their experiment? Or is there a collaboration? And even deeper, it could be that maybe the more advanced alien technology or the advanced alien civilization is in control of, or the harbingers or the creators of that lesser alien race as their subservient beings. That would be an interesting universe to live in.
To continue with that, the concept of multiple races of aliens, the earliest inscriptions or the usage of the term Anunnaki come from 2144 to 2124 BCE. So that's roughly like 5,000 years. Let's ballpark it, 5,000.
That's crazy. Yeah.
Yeah. So who's not to say within that 5,000 year span that they either could have been subjugated themselves by the Greys, who are probably more technologically superior, or they just destroyed themselves. Because
that's a possibility.
Yeah, if you go back again, I don't mean to keep going back to the creation myth of the Sumerians, But the reason that they came to Earth was because their planet was dying. They needed gold for their atmosphere or something like that for their planet Nibiru, right?
Okay.
So it's within the realm of possibility. Let's say that the Anunnaki did die out, or whatever remnants are out there, they're not strong enough to come back. And what I mean by that is, okay, if you have the gray aliens, right, that are coming down, they're abducting people, they're doing their social experiments, this, and that. If they have the ability to do that, you should be comfortable in the idea that they have technology to obliterate a planet if they wanted to.
Right.
So I think it's, if there are multiple civilizations out there, they're at different tiers of civilization, and maybe the Greys are the penultimate, that they have the technology that they could use to wipe anyone out, but they're so focused on exploration and scientific advancement that they don't need to, but if they have to, they will.
There are two things that to unpack there that I find really interesting. The first one is, if you have an alien race like the Anunnaki, if they were to see the gray, like we're just using an example as the Greys, like we don't know if they're, like, we're just using them as a placeholder to say a more advanced technology, like an advanced civilization or whatever. So like if you have the Anunnaki who may be less technologically inclined to understand the universe than the Greys, then what would that mean about their psychology? That would be like, I kind of think of like us,
or we
like,
could use the reptilians instead of Anunnaki.
Sure. Yeah. Like whatever it ran, like, sub-advanced, or not really, like more advanced than human beings, but not as advanced as whatever the Greys, or a million-year-old civilization. So that, to me, that would kind of be like us looking back on human beings, even just like 200 or 300 years ago. Right. So it's like, they didn't have a lot of the things we have. The average person didn't understand a lot of the information that we had, that the average person understands today. But then if you look at someone like Einstein, leaps and bounds, still a human himself, but leaps and bounds ahead of the rest of humanity. But you and I could not keep up with him in a conversation about physics or astrophysics or whatever. Even whatever, use a modern example too, Neil deGrasse Tyson. So same concept. So it's so interesting to me, this idea that there could be an alien race that is not as advanced as the most advanced alien race who is also present around them. But at the same time, what does that mean about how the less advanced race perceives the universe and perceives their place in the universe? Do they still hold some kind of like religious belief? Do they still hold some kind of like spiritual or purpose belief, whereas the more advanced race is just purely science and technology? And then if that's the case, why would not the more advanced or the slightly less advanced alien race understand, based off of what they know about the more advanced scientifically inclined, why would they themselves not try to go after science and technology? So they must have their own structure, their own civilization, and what they believe in terms of like what their purpose is in the universe. So going back to the Anunnaki and the Anunnaki showing up here and possibly exploiting humanity, it's kind of like a similar idea where the Anunnaki saw humanity as like a lesser group of beings that they could exploit, but at the same time, they didn't care about what happened afterwards in the same way that they don't care about what the more advanced race is doing. So if the Anunnaki are completely gone, like you theorize is possible, and the Greys the more advanced one, are still around, then that must be kind of like the ultimate perspective of the universe from the Greys' point of view, because the Greys are just trying to get science and technology tighter in their understanding of the universe. So therefore, they don't really have a need to interact with us. And I kind of went down a tangent there, but do you have anything to add on that?
No, I think you're right that they'll get to a point where they don't need to interact with us because they could view us from afar. If I have the technology to pluck someone out of their home in the middle of the night and run medical experiments, extract DNA, whatever, right? If I had the technology to do that, why would I even bother with contacting them?
Yes. Yeah.
Because who's going to believe them? I mean, that's the thing.
Right.
That's the thing that we're seeing right now. Like the last podcast that we did where we talked about alien abductions, the same thing appears over and over again, is the believability of their story. maybe where the quote unquote grays have some sort of leeway. They have that little wiggle room because it doesn't matter how many people we abduct as long as we don't take like 10,000 people at the same time.
Yeah.
But if we do it sporadically, they'll just think they're crazy or they're making it up.
And that idea is actually why I have more hope that such an advanced race is more benevolent or kinder and less selfish than we would fear. Because if you think about that for a second, what that means. So if you have such an advanced race of alien being who, let's say they are abducting people from their homes. So let's just look at that real quickly. What does that mean? That means that they need that human body to experiment on. Maybe they could create that body in a petri dish because they've clearly, if they really have been abducting people here and there for medical experiments, they have a complete understanding of our DNA, our genetic makeup. They almost certainly at that level of technology have a way to duplicate us or whatever. So why not just create human beings from a virtual perspective, or even if they needed to, just grow them in a petri dish or some kind of advanced technology that creates a human being that they don't have to pluck out of society. So there's two things there. Does that mean that they do want to kind of like expose themselves a little bit by plucking these people out and then giving them stories to take back to their civilization as like kind of hints and tips and cues about what is the ultimate nature of the universe and other beings? Or less likely, do they not have that technology at their disposal to where they could do like a really advanced genetic run of our DNA and then create some kind of like virtual, what would you call it? Like virtual, like schematic or whatever that they can then play with virtually and not harm anybody or not take anybody. So there are all kinds of questions about how advanced technology plays into these cases of alien abduction and even past historic cases of like interactions. Like what's the level of technology, and based off of that story that we've heard about abductions or advanced civilizations in the past, what is most likely and what is most likely at their disposal, and why are they doing what they do? And then the last thing I'll say about the alien abduction side is, maybe like going back to the benevolent idea, maybe they really do want to preserve life, or they do covet the preservation of life more as they get more advanced, because why would they not just take us and not return us? Or why would they not just take our DNA and grow a clone of us and just torture us with experiments? Maybe there's something in their bylaws or their beliefs to say, okay, I need to do experiments, but the only way to do it ethically is to take the being out of its environment, sedate it, and try to make sure it has no idea that it happened. And maybe there's just like some flaws in its technology or something that made the person remember when they were abducted. But that's my hope. My hope is that when they pull these people out, if it's happening, that they do care enough about the sanctity of life and the psychology of human beings to where they want to protect us a little bit. So they're not growing a copy of us in a petri dish. They're not taking us out away from our home forever. They believe in that structure of life and the beauty of life. So that's a hope anyway. I don't know.
That would be the best case scenario. But my cynical ass, I think, well, let me put my tinfoil hat back on. Well, I have one on right now for this podcast. Let's put a second one on. Remember how we talked about that lady that talked about the hybrid theory, the
Yes.
Bridget Nielsen or whatever?
Yes.
Yeah. Who's to say that they're not extracting our DNA to, one, either make hybrids, or two, making us in petri dishes with the intent of splicing our DNA with theirs to make some sort of like superhuman,
Terrible.
and then integrating integrating that person back into society.
Yes. That's conspiracy theory right there. That is a very, very astute and an interesting perspective. I think that if you want to go down a very convoluted conspiratorial route, I totally agree that that's possible. So aliens abducting people and wanting to mask that abduction to the best of their abilities, so they then can trick the human beings who are in power to make sure that those people don't catch on and then humans who are integrated or spliced with their DNA are injected into society as beings who can control the rest of the race. But one huge however with that is, if that was their goal, wouldn't they be able to come up with a better idea than that? If they really wanted to control the human beings that exist now, you have to ask what the reasoning behind that would be. Like, why not, if it's the space, if it's the physical attributes of the world, just wipe us out? You know, introduce some virus based off of our DNA that just kills everybody within a matter of like a year. And then they have free reign. So they must not need the world. I mean, they could probably harvest resources if they even need resources as other planets. So what would be another reasoning behind that? Maybe it's because they want to use us as slaves in a bad scenario, and they can't possibly reproduce as many human beings as already exist that have been grown in the last like thousands of years or whatever. So in that case, maybe they do need to take our DNA to splice with theirs to create some kind of hybrid that can control us to where they can lead us down a path of being exploited for whatever benefit that they're trying to achieve. However, that seems like a bad plan to me, because if you splice human DNA with alien DNA and you get a hybrid, then some remnants of the human must still be in there. We've all seen that movie, right? Like, there's always been some movie where you entered, like, I don't know, what's the Pocahontas, right? Like, Pocahontas was a Native Indian or a Native American girl who won the heart of some white conqueror, and it's the same kind of concept. Like, why would an alien race take the risk of splicing DNA, creating beings that are meant to control us when they still have half of their DNA resonating with human beings? Maybe that's taking a risk of developing some kind of affinity to the human beings and protecting them. So that to me, honestly, that doesn't sound as likely. However, who knows what other benefits they could achieve by splicing DNA? Maybe it's taking and creating a race elsewhere that is separate from humanity to do like some slave work for them or whatever. That's possible. Or maybe it's like, I know there was an old episode of Stargate, which is one of my all-time favorite sci-fi shows, where, oh God, what was it? The Asgard. The Asgard were basically the Greys. Like, they look like Greys in the show. And their race was so old and their DNA was so recycled from duplication, because they lost the ability to sexually reproduce. So they completely reproduced through scientific means, but they had recycled their DNA so much that their race was breaking down faster and faster, and they had no way to save them. So I think one concept in the show was somehow to reintroduce DNA to create a new type of vessel for them. So maybe it's completely possible where they would need human beings. Maybe like it's an investment back, 5,000 plus years ago. It's an investment for them, or even 500,000 years ago when modern humans started coming onto the page. Maybe that's their investment to say, okay, in 500,000 or a million years from now, our bodies are not going to be able to sustain regenerative properties of duplication for DNA splicing or DNA recreation. So therefore, we're going to need beings that are close enough to our DNA that we can retrofit for new vessels to continue our life as a civilization for another million years. So in that case, it's kind of like it's like a double-edged sword. Like, it's kind of beautiful, but kind of nefarious in a sense. Like, yeah, you're creating beings who inherently have problems, but inherently have beauty. But you're also not going to like take those people out and like exploit them directly. You're just going to take their DNA that evolved and use that DNA that it has no connection to the original people and use it for your own benefit to advance your civilization. So it's kind of like bad in a way. It's like kind of evil, but it's kind of good. So I don't know. Do you have any ideas or thoughts on that?
Actually, I do. And to go back to the whole hybrid thing that we're talking about, I think that this is just me thinking. It's not what I'm about to say is not conspiracy theory or anything like that. This is purely what I believe scientifically, that humanity is on the brink of becoming a warp technology civilization. Whether it's the next 50 years, 100 years, 200 years, I think we will eventually develop some sort of warp drive and eventually get to the point where we could travel to at the speed of light or even faster than the speed of light. I don't even know if that's physically possible. It might
Like
be. There might be.
fold space time or something. Yeah.
Right. There might be some sort of mathematical equation that explains it. I've never looked into it. Even if I did, I probably wouldn't understand it. But I think tying this together with the whole hybrid theory and aliens creating us, I think the reason, tinfoil hat back on, I think the reason that this whole hybrid concept that they might be doing is that they recognize that, let's say, like going back to the Anunnaki, right? They created us and then they died out. And then the Greys found us and then they observe us for all these thousands of years. And they're like, okay, you know what? They might be, a race of creatures that like to wage war, but they are close to the point where they'll realize that fighting over all of this superficial crap is pointless. And maybe the whole concept of them taking humans, taking our DNA, splicing it with their DNA to make hybrids that look like human, that look exactly like us, right? Because if they're an advanced civilization, I believe they could, and have all this technology, they should be able to mold something with whatever way they want it to look. These hybrids that look exactly like us, but have a more elevated way of thinking, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's definitely a really good point. I mean, if you talk about, see, that's the thing that I always go back to in terms of thinking about aliens and their possible presence. I just want to reiterate to any listeners that personally, like, I believe that I always look in terms of likelihood. I think it's likely, based off of all the evidence and all the basically the interactions or things that people have said over the years about how they've experienced certain things, like all of that together combined drastically increases the likelihood that aliens are visiting us. However, I don't want to go, I swear to God, I'm not going to go down this tangent in this episode because it's going to open up a whole other can of worms. But you also look at the idea that human beings also have this belief and all this evidence and hearsay about ghosts and the spiritual realm and but what does that really mean? And so what does it mean to be in a universe where, or at least even just on the planet, where you have the concept of physical beings who are advanced, and you're talking about pure technological advancement. You're talking about space-time, space travel, things that we understand about all of our advanced technology, basically, multiplied by 1,000,000. It's pure technology. But then you have the other side where we still have stories about religion and metaphysical experiences and ghost sightings and experiencing life after death and coming back. Like all these stories, like what does it mean to exist in both, like in a time period and a place as human beings where both things are possible, both things are being experienced? So that's why I always go back to this broader idea about kind of meshing the two, about, what is the nature of reality? What is the nature of existence? Are advanced races of aliens like purely just like, are they just physical, like our bodies, like human being bodies? Are they synthetic? Maybe it's totally possible that aliens who have been visiting us for thousands of years, who are possibly 1,000,000 years old, they came from a civilization that created a technology that looks like a being, but in reality it's all synthetic. Maybe it's some kind of advanced synthetic robot or something like that houses some kind of consciousness. That could very well explain the missing technology about how time travel factors into aliens. And even all the way back to the Anunnaki. The Anunnaki supposedly showed up from Nibiru, right? And they came from a planet that is supposedly nearby, but still the nearest planet that we know of is still like, I don't even know how, like 10 light or 100 light years away or something crazy like that, where it would take a very long time to get to the next closest exoplanet that we know of, maybe an Alpha Centauri. So it's totally feasible that these beings who are traveling maybe sent some kind of synthetic being from a distance and are being controlled by their actual physical minds or bodies remotely in another galaxy or very, very in a long distance away. So what implication does that have in terms of our understanding about spirituality and what it means to like kind of elevate ourselves into the godly realm like the Anunnaki? And that's just my way of kind of tying it back to the idea that the Anunnaki were still, no matter what, at the end of the day, to the people back then, the Sumerians, they were gods. Like they believed they were supernatural, and they believed that they were on a different plane of existence that came to our existence. I just love thinking about what that implication of that is in terms of the physical versus the spiritual.
Thank you for tuning into today's episode of The Wandering Road. If you enjoyed today's episode, please subscribe and share with your friends. I hope you have a great day, and I look forward to you joining me for the next one.